Greetings, Missouri Mid-South. Thank you again for your thoughtful emails, texts, and conversations about our values as a conference. I've really enjoyed your thoughts on Covenant and your enthusiasm for this discussion in general. The conversation this past week in our Tuesday morning clergy Zoom ended up identifying another value to add to the list, and that's exactly what I'm hoping to do with this series. Get us thinking about and naming our values, questioning and examining them so we don't take them and one another for granted. That said, I'm going to pause the values conversations this week and do a little financial reporting instead. I'll make the tie-in clear and let you know that one of the values we'll be discussing in the future is accountability. I said I'd give an update when we have final numbers on the Shannondale Carbon Credit expenses, and that math is finally done and we've begun taking action on those distributions. So I want to share that information with you. We've also completed the sale of 2 pieces of Tambo, so I want to give you some preliminary information about that situation as well. First, the carbon credits income. You may recall that our total sale amount was $276,785.93. We've determined that our expenses related to the sale totaled $26,501.30. That's legal and banking fees, as well as fees to the Climate Action Reserve, the folks in California who issue the carbon credits to us, and the final fees to our partners at Finite Carbon who do all of the carbon calculations and other paperworky things for us so we can stay on top of the business. So the total remaining that we have to distribute is $250,284.63. In 2022, we adopted a formula for distribution of the assets, 50% going to long-term investments and 50% for short-term use. Last week, we sent out the checks for the long-term items, a little over $25,000 going to the national setting of the UCC, and the same amounts going to the Shannondale Reserve Fund and to the Tree Farm Re-Verification Fund, and a little over $50,000 going to the Legacy Carbon Credit Operating Reserve Fund. The Shannondale Reserve and the Legacy Reserve Funds do generate a little bit of annual income for Shannondale and conference operations, so we expect to see a slight increase in our investment income, maybe a few $1,000s this year, because of those additions to the funds. That leaves us still with the other 50% for short-term use. These short-term funds will be invested so they'll continue to grow over time before we put them to use. We have a little over $25,000 to support additional staff compensation at Shannondale for the next 5 years. That means $5,000 a year extra to make sure that our wages at Shannondale are fair and just wages, and that we're able to be competitive in what we're offering to pay our staff. We also have a little over $25,000 to set aside for a project of the board's choosing, and the board is beginning to generate ideas for what that project might be, so stay tuned, and if you have an idea, email me. The biggest single chunk of funds is that 30% that goes to capital projects at Shannondale, and that amount totals $75,085.39. Now, we've also done the calculations to know what was spent on capital improvements at Shannondale in 2023, after the board of directors approved an advance of $50,000 for necessary water, septic, and electricity work in the church and the timber lodge. This work was critical for building safety and care for the environment, and knowing that the carbon credit sale was coming, the board gave the go-ahead to begin the work before we had that cash in hand. In 9 months in 2023, we spent $50,368.15 on those critical projects, and that amount was offset by $1,385 in donations from the Shannondale UCC and individual members of the conference. Thank you for those gifts. This means that we have $26,102.24 remaining to spend immediately on capital improvements at Shannondale in order to make the spaces more hospitable, more modern, and more environmentally sound. There are so many projects that still need to be done that $26,000 will go quickly. And if you'd like to make a gift to add to that amount, you can do so through our website at mmsucc.org by clicking the orange Give Now button at the top of the page. We need to finish upgrading the electrical wiring at the church. We have 3 cabins near the timber lodge that we're updating to make suitable for families to rent. We've got a well waiting for a chlorinator to be installed. We've got 4 buildings that we took completely offline last year that we need to renovate in order to make them habitable again. That $26,000 isn't going to go very far to accomplish all that. That's the distribution breakdown of the income of the 2024 sale of our Shannondale Carbon LLC carbon credits. That's it. I also said I'd give you an update on Tambo. We have now completed 2 sales of Tambo Land, one at the end of January and one in mid-February. One came right on the heels of the other. The first sale was 51.3 acres to a neighbor, and the second sale was 68.37 acres to some friends of that neighbor. That's just under 120 acres total. Both parties agreed to the same set of covenants in the course of the transactions in order to preserve the integrity of the natural ecology of the land. For the next 25 years, if they want to sell any part of the land, they have to offer it to us first. In perpetuity, the property must be used for residential or recreational purposes only. There can be no commercial timber harvesting without our consent. Nobody can divide the property into parcels less than 20 acres. And they can't build more than one single-family house on any tract of land. And it has to be an actual house, not like a trailer. We've also kept 10 acres of Tambo where the maintenance shed is currently located, which we don't plan to sell until we can find a suitable place to put a maintenance shed on the Moval side of the road. That could take a month, that could take a year. We're open to possibilities here. When we do sell that land, we'll put the same restrictions in place that we put on the first 2 sales. So far, the combined sales totaled $914,640. The realtor's fee was 5%. Additionally, we had to hire a surveyor. We had our lawyers help us with contract work. There are fees to the title company. We had an appraiser. There were other closing costs as well. We're working to calculate all of those expenses. We still have the legal fees to finalize, which was also the case with the carbon credits. And then we'll be able to finalize the distribution of those funds as well. As a reminder, we're setting aside 10% of the net proceeds for the Pursuing Justice and Equity Core Ministry team to use to combat white supremacy in the Missouri Mid-South Conference. And we're setting aside 30% for the Moval Capital Campaign. We're using up to the full remaining 60% to cover the operating shortfalls from Moval in 2022 and 2023. Whatever's left will go into reserves for later consideration. That means we have some math to do. We're calculating what of Moval's expenses in those 2 years were capital versus operating. We want to make sure that we categorize those expenses properly. On an Excel spreadsheet, that's almost 4,000 individual transactions to sort out. So that's a project that will take some time to finalize. We'll report back on that later this year. We're also working with this information to prepare for our long-awaited capital campaign. So keep an eye out for more on that as well.